Ontario is waking up to 4 more years of Doug Ford. His Progressive Conservative Party sailed to an even bigger majority in yesterday's provincial election.
What a night and what a result! Together, we have done the impossible. We have made history. Thank you, everyone.
Ford's Progressive Conservatives won 83 seats, a gain of 7 from 2018. The NDP won 31 seats and will be and continue to be the official opposition. The Liberals took 8 seats and again failed to get official party status. The Green Party retains its 1 seat and 1 independent candidate won a seat. CBC's Ellen Morrow has the story.
This was a huge victory for Doug Ford. It is the norm in Ontario politics for a government to be re-elected to a second term, but it is not the norm for that government to be able to grow its majority by so much in that second term. So again, a triumph for Doug Ford. There's going to be a lot of analysis in the coming days about just how he was able to do this, because think back to the darkest days of the pandemic when the Ford government's response was being criticized by experts. He hasn't always been a very popular premier, but this campaign and this election was not about that. Polling showed voters were most worried about issues of affordability, the cost of living, housing, and Ford was able to capitalize on that. Here's what we heard from him in his victory speech.
So if you're a miner in the north who's out of work, I want you to know we're building that road to the Ring of Fire. If you've had to worry about your job at the local auto plant, I want you to know we're investing in the future of Ontario's auto sector. If you're a student who wants to work in the tech sector, we will have a job waiting for you.
Now he has to make good on those promises he made during the campaign about building more infrastructure, building Highway 13, building more hospitals. For the opposition parties, this election was a dismal result. Both Andrea Horwath and Stephen Del Duca announcing they are stepping down. This was the 4th election for Andrea Horwath as leader of the Ontario NDP, and she gave an emotional speech.
It's time for me to pass the torch, to pass the baton, to hand off the leadership of the NDP. And you know what? It makes me sad, but it makes me happy because our team is so strong right now.
Stephen Del Duca, as I mentioned, also stepping down as leader of his party. He didn't even win his own riding of Vaughan Woodbridge in this election. So again, a very disappointing result for the opposition parties and for those voters who don't like Doug Ford. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Toronto.
And for more on the election outcome, I'm joined by Mike Crawley. He is, of course, the CBC's Ontario Provincial Affairs reporter. Mike, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome, John.
How did Doug Ford do it? And I ask that because we're following this, but also probably a number of other Conservative politicians across the country might be following this quite closely.
Look, John, I think there's a couple reasons of how they did it, and the Conservative politicians should look at what happened in Ontario federally and compare that to what just happened in Ontario provincially. Doug Ford won a whole bunch of seats in the Greater Toronto area and in Toronto itself that went Liberal in the federal election, and he could only have done that by getting people who don't normally vote Conservative to vote for him. So you've got the specter of people who voted for Justin Trudeau's Liberals just voted for Doug Ford's Progressive Conservatives. But he also expanded the PC tent here in Ontario in another way, which was persuading enough voters in places like Windsor, even in one seat in Hamilton, that his party is on the side of workers, which is, a pretty dramatic transformation for the PCs, because Doug Ford and his government, when they first were in power, they did things like freeze the minimum wage, scrapping paid sick days, and making it harder to join a union, and yet they ran a campaign in which they persuaded some voters, at least, that they were on the side of workers.
as you say, a big majority and a situation where with this extra seats that he has won, what is it going to mean moving forward? It's a party with big plans.
Well, so it's a resounding win, no question, for the PCs, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do with it, especially with such a weak opposition. You know, does Doug Ford take this as carte blanche to kind of do whatever he wants because they got such a whopping mandate? Does he revert to the Doug Ford of 4 years ago when he came into power and the PCs went into Queen's Park with their elbows up and broke a lot of things and made a lot of changes and made a lot of people unhappy? Or is he tempered by the pandemic, and does he heed the advice that Andrea Horwath gave him last night in that emotional concession speech in which she said what this election was not a vote for? She said it's not a vote for cuts. And so that's going to be something that I'm going to be watching for in the next 4 years. And also, how do they handle rampant inflation, really high house prices? Are they able to do anything about that for the people of Ontario?
Mike, thanks so much for this. And of course, the two of the other parties now will be looking for leaders. So there will be more to cover in the Ontario political scene in the coming months. Mike Crawley, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome, John.